Seraphine Ashwood was 17 years old, the first time she walked into a room and felt the ground shift under her feet. It was not an earthquake. It was not nerves. She had been nervous before, the night her father's pack was dissolved, the morning she moved into the charity rooms at the edge of the Draveth estate, the first time she served tea to people who used to bow to her family. She knew what nerves felt like. They sat small and cold in the chest. This was nothing like that. This was a pull, deep and certain, like a rope tied around her ribs, drawing tight. She stood in the doorway of the Border Summit Hall and looked across 60 feet of polished stone floor, past lords and generals and pack representatives in their finest coats, and her eyes landed on him. King Calum Draveth was 22. He was already looking at her. She had heard about the mate bond all her life. Her mother described it as a song you already knew the words to, even though you had never heard it before. Her father said it was more like recognition, like finding a room in a house you thought you had fully explored. Standing in that doorway, Seraphine thought they were both right and both wrong. It was not music. It was not architecture. It was just certainty, the kind that sits in the bones. She looked at him. He looked at her. Then a general stepped between them, and the moment passed, and the summit began, and neither of them said a single word about it for 3 months. Those 3 months were the strangest of her life. Calum found reasons to be in the same rooms as her. She found herself arriving places slightly early. They talked about pack law and boundary disputes and the price of grain in the Eastern Territories. They talked about books. They talked about her father once, briefly. He asked a careful question, and she gave a careful answer, and they both moved on without pressing the bruise. He was not easy to know. He thought before he spoke, which she respected. He kept his feelings behind glass, which she understood, because she did the same thing. But every so often, when it was just the two of them in a library or walking the grounds in the blue hour before dinner, the glass thinned, and she could see something real moving behind it. She thought, this is enough. This is already something. Whatever comes next, these 3 months happened. She was right to think that. She just did not know yet that she was already in the past tense. The Duke of Holt arrived on a Wednesday with his daughter Mira, and a proposal that made every advisor in the Draveth court lean forward in their chairs. 3 territories. The northern trade routes, a military alliance that would settle a border conflict that had been bleeding resources for 8 years. All of it in exchange for one thing: a marriage. Seraphine heard about it from a maid, who heard it from a steward, who heard it from the meeting room door. She sat with the information for a long time. She turned it over. She thought, there are things that cannot compete with northern trade routes, and perhaps I am one of them. She told herself to wait, to give him the chance to come to her. He came to her 4 days later. It was evening, the library, the room they had made into something without meaning to. He stood by the window and did not look at her when he first started speaking. He used careful words, words like political necessity and the kingdom's stability and timing. He spoke about duty the way people speak about a force of nature, something that cannot be argued with, something that simply exists and must be accounted for. She listened to all of it. When he finished, the room was very quiet. You have already decided, she said. He did not deny it. She stood up. She smoothed her dress, not because it needed smoothing, but because her hands needed somewhere to go. She looked at him, really looked at him, one last time, and she said, I hope it is worth it. She meant it. She genuinely meant it. She was not being cruel. She simply knew, with the same certainty she had felt in that doorway 3 months ago, that he was making a mistake he would not understand for years. The formal rejection happened 6 days later, in the throne room, in front of the court. Pack law required it. A mate bond, once known, had to be formally dissolved before any other union could be recognized. It had to be witnessed. It had to be spoken aloud. Seraphine stood in the center of the room. She had worn her best dress, not out of vanity, out of principle. Calum spoke the words the law required. His voice was steady. She noticed that. She noticed everything about those 2 minutes with the sharp, terrible attention of someone who knows they are living through something they will carry forever. She did not cry. She had decided that before she walked in, and she held to it. When it was done, she turned and walked out. No rushing, no slowness, just walking, the way a person walks when they have decided that everything they do from this moment forward is the first step of something new. At the gate, an old man pressed a sealed letter into her hands. Elder Rowan. He was one of the oldest members of the Dravith Council, white-haired and bent slightly at the shoulders, and he looked at her with eyes that carried something she would later identify as guilt. "Your mother should have told you," he said. "I should have told you years ago. I am sorry, child." She put the letter in her bag. She did not ask him what it meant. Something told her to wait, to be somewhere else, to be alone when she read it. She left that night. The inn was 3 territories over, and it smelled like pine and old wood, and the particular quietness of a place where no one knows your name. She sat at a table in the corner, ordered something warm to drink, and opened the letter. She read it once, then she sat very still. Then she read it again. The Ashwood name had not always been Ashwood. That was a simplification, a piece of history that had been quietly folded and put away. Her mother's line, the line that passed through daughters, the line that had never been spoken about at official gatherings, was Sylvain. The founding line. The bloodline from which every werewolf kingdom on the continent drew its claim to legitimacy. Not all kingdoms knew their own histories well enough to understand what that meant. But the ones who kept old records knew. Elder Rowan knew. He had known since before she was born. The Sylvain line had not disappeared. It had hidden. Her grandmother had hidden it deliberately, after a political crisis that cost too many lives. The name was buried. The claim was buried. Only the blood remained, carrying on quietly in daughters who were never told what they carried. Seraphine was the last. She put the letter down on the table. She ordered a second drink. She sat in that quiet inn in the middle of nowhere and she looked at the wall and she thought, all right, this is what there is. This is what I have. She did not cry. She had already used that decision in the throne room, and it had held, and she found it held here too. She slept. In the morning she started. The 5 years that followed were not romantic. They were not a story of a woman waiting. They were a story of a woman working. She found Elder Rowan's contacts first, scholars and archivists who had maintained quiet records of the Sylvain bloodline out of academic faithfulness, not political agenda. She spent 8 months in reading rooms and private libraries, learning the full shape of what she carried. Then she found the packs. There were 11 of them, small to mid-sized, scattered across territories that the Dravith Dominion had absorbed or pressured over the decades. Not conquered, absorbed. There was a difference, and the people who lived it felt the difference every day. They were not mistreated. They were simply diminished, made smaller than they had been, their histories footnoted rather than centered. Seraphine sat with their elders. She listened for long hours. She asked questions and took notes, and did not make promises she could not keep. She was honest about who she was, and what she was trying to do, and what she could and could not guarantee. She was 22 before she had assembled anything that looked like a coalition. She was 23 before it felt solid. She kept building. The governance proposals she drafted herself, mostly late at night with 2 candles and terrible tea. She had no formal training in law, so she hired a lawyer and read everything he gave her twice, and asked questions until he stopped being surprised by them. She built frameworks for shared territorial management, for cultural preservation, for economic cooperation between packs that had historically competed. She was not doing it to impress anyone. She was doing it because the problem was real, and she was in a position to solve it, and there was no one else who would. Meanwhile, in the Dravith Dominion, the Northern Alliance lasted 14 months. The Duke of Holt died of a sudden illness. His 3 sons, who had never agreed about anything in their lives, went to war with each other over the inheritance. 2 of the 3 territories fell into dispute. The trade routes became contested ground. The military alliance that was supposed to stabilize 8 years of border conflict instead created 4 new ones. Calum managed it. He was a good king in the practical sense, decisive, organized, not given to panic. He made difficult decisions and accepted the cost of them. He held the Dominion together. But there was a particular kind of exhaustion that came from constantly managing things that should not have needed managing, a tiredness that had nothing to do with sleep. He had bought the northern roots with something real, and the roots had not held, and he was left with the bill. He did not think about Seraphine often. He had trained himself not to. Thinking about her cost something he needed elsewhere. But sometimes, in quiet rooms, late in the evening, he thought about a girl who had not cried, about the particular way she had said, "I hope it is worth it," about the fact that she had meant it kindly, and that had been, somehow, the most difficult part. She arrived on a Tuesday. No announcement, no herald. She rode through the eastern gate of the Dravith capital with 17 pack leaders at her back, and Elder Rowan, still alive, still carrying his guilt like luggage, riding beside her in a cart, because he was 81 and could not sit a horse properly anymore. The court received her in the throne room. Calum sat at the head of the long council table, and she walked in, and he saw her, and something in his chest moved that he had not given permission to move. She looked the same. She did not look the same. She looked like a person who had finished becoming something, and the finishing had taken exactly as long as it needed to take, and now here she was, complete in a way she had not been at 17, at the gate, with one bag and a sealed letter. She sat across from him. She opened her documents. She was calm, completely calm, not the calm of someone suppressing something, the calm of someone who had long ago made peace with the thing they were walking into. The presentation took 40 minutes. She laid out the Bloodline documentation, the authentication from Elder Rowan, and 3 independent scholars, the territorial claims under original continental law, and the governance proposals she had spent 3 years writing. Then she laid out the alternatives. If the Dravith Dominion chose not to recognize the Sylvain restoration, the coalition had the legal standing to challenge the throne's claim to 8 of its current territories through the Continental Elder Courts. The process would take years. The instability would cost more than the territories were worth. The Dominion would survive it, probably, but it would be smaller and weaker, and the damage would compound. Or, joint governance. A recognized Sylvain queendom operating in parallel with the Dravith Dominion under a shared continental treaty, territorial cooperation, economic partnership, peace built on actual foundations rather than marriages and trade agreements that could collapse when the people who signed them died. She slid the treaty draft across the table. "I have not come to take anything," she said. "I have come to offer something. What you do with it is your decision." The council argued for 3 hours. She sat through all of it. When someone asked her a question, she answered it. When someone challenged the documentation, she directed them to the relevant pages. She did not raise her voice. She did not perform patience. She simply had it, the real kind, built over 5 years of sitting in rooms and waiting for people to think their way through things. At the end of the 3 hours, Calum called a recess. He asked her to walk with him. They went out to the grounds, the same grounds they had walked in that blue evening hour 5 years ago. The trees were larger. Everything was slightly different in the way that places are, when time has passed, and you were not there to watch it change. He walked beside her for a while without speaking. She let him. "I made a mistake," he said finally. She did not say, "Yes, you did." She did not say, "I know." She did not perform graciousness or bitterness, because she felt neither. She felt something quieter than either of those things, something close to the feeling of a door that has been open for a long time, finally, not closing, just understood to be open and left that way. "You made a decision," she said, "with what you knew and what you valued at the time. That is a generous reading." "It is an accurate reading," she said. "I am not being generous. I am being precise." He looked at her. "Are you all right?" The question surprised her, because it was the right question, and she had not expected it. She thought about it honestly. "I am more than all right," she said. "I am someone I respect." He did not answer that. She did not need him to. The treaty was signed on a Friday, 3 weeks later, witnessed by 17 pack leaders, Elder Rowan, 2 continental law scholars, and the full Dravith Council. It was 43 pages long, and had taken a team of lawyers the full 3 weeks to finalize. Seraphine Sylvain, she had taken back the name 2 years prior, quietly, in a small ceremony with no audience, signed it at the top of the first page, her seal pressed into warm wax, the old Sylvain crest, the one that had been buried for a generation, coming back into the light. Calum signed beneath her. When the witnesses were filing out and the lawyers were gathering their papers, he stood beside her at the table for a moment, in the small privacy of an emptying room. "What happens now?" he asked. "Now," she said, rolling her copy of the treaty carefully, "we govern." She tucked it under her arm. She walked toward the door. At the threshold she paused, not dramatically, not for effect, simply because something made her pause. "But you asked if I was all right," she said, without turning around. "I am, in case you were still wondering." She walked out into the hallway, where her people were waiting, where her work was waiting, where the rest of her life was waiting, already built and solid, and entirely her own. The door closed quietly behind her,